Thank you all for your patience and your endurance. We'll get right to this because we want to really share with you a little bit about the Coast Guard, about the Coast Guard's mission, and about the service. First, of course, appropriately, thank the Navy Memorial Foundation for that beautiful exhibit on the year of the Coast Guard. So thank you very much. There's an enormous amount of work that goes into that, and I can see that their heart and soul went into that. And we really appreciate it. On behalf of my colleagues here, thank you, as well as to the American Veterans Center for honoring the sacrifices of all service members and also guarding our legacy. And those are very important things. I wanted to, on behalf of all of us on the panel, we want to just take a minute to share with you the Coast Guard's experiences. These outstanding officers will share with you their experiences, but also educate you about what the Coast Guard does. And I'm fairly convinced that I continue to learn more about what the Coast Guard does, so I'm fairly sure you may learn something about what the Coast Guard does. How many folks in here are Coasties? All right. Thank you for your service. Most recently, I had the privilege of leading the 2,700-person Coast Guard deployable specialized forces and the 27 geographically dispersed operational commands of the Coast Guard's deployable specialized forces. And we had the privilege of supporting DoD and the operational commanders around the world and the Department of State. And people don't know this, and here's your first lesson learned, the Environmental Protection Agency, because one of our missions is to respond to oil and hazardous materials. And we are a premier service through our strike teams and our deployable specialized forces for doing so. We'll tell you a little bit about where that has had us go during world history. The topic's important to me because in that regard, I also commanded the Coast Guard's Atlantic Strike Team. From 2000 to 2003, I'll let you do the math. We were in New York City. I was in New York City on 9/11. Immediately started to support our Coast Guard activities in New York and Admiral Bennis in the evacuation of Lower Manhattan. If you want to study mass evacuation and you want to study the complexities of working with a population in crisis, review that history. We talk a lot about what happened at Ground Zero, but there was an entire city to deal with at that point. And the Coast Guard's role in coordinating with all the vessels in the area to get those people safely off the island. That tragedy marks one of our country's most dramatic shifts in our domestic threat environment and to our U.S. strategic interests here and around the world. And that's where our topic on talking about Coast Guard's role in the global war on terror comes in. This was the moment. There was a moment. How many people remember where you were 9/11? We all remember where we were on 9/11. As the panel members offer their thoughts, you'll hear about the Coast Guard's layered security, safety, and our response strategy since 9/11. Well beyond our role supporting NORTHCOM as a combatant commander, which we certainly do, in Operation Noble Eagle and in protecting the airspace in the National Capital Region. This strategy positions the Coast Guard and our shore-based units, our maritime patrol and deployable specialized forces in the offshore, the high seas, the coastal, and our inland maritime environments. This strategy helps us interdict, more importantly, prevent threats, and prevent them early enough before they reach our shores, and it also helps us improve our ability to respond to the contingency and surge operations. You may have heard about us most recently in our support to Deepwater Horizon and surge operations. While that was an industrial accident, could just easily have been a terrorist threat. And we practice and train in our Tier 2 deployable specialized force, the Marine Safety Response Team, practices off of those very critical Gulf oil platforms for maritime interdiction operations as well as deploying around the world. We are very proud of our unique dual role as a member of the Department of Homeland Security. We are an agency, we are in a civilian department, military service under the Department of Homeland Security, and our role as a member of the armed forces. So the Coast Guard is simultaneously and at all times both an armed force in the United States under 14 U.S.C. 1 and a law enforcement agency under 14 U.S.C. 89. Our capabilities are extremely relevant, valuable, and needed for maritime homeland security. So what do these capabilities and authorities allow us to do? And the panel members will share with you the examples and their perspective on this. It allows us to prevent terrorist attacks within and terrorist exploitation of our maritime domain. It reduces our vulnerability to terrorism. It protects U.S. population centers, critical infrastructure, maritime borders and ports, coastal approaches, and the boundaries and seams between them, because enemies seek the seams. They look for our weaknesses, and that's what they exploit. We have to make sure that they don't. We protect the maritime transportation system. 80% of goods and services that come into the United States come through our maritime transportation system, come through our ports and waterways. And we minimize the damage, as the National Strike Force and Atlantic Strike Team tried to do during 9/11 in supporting our federal and civilian partners, and recover quickly from these attacks, being at either the lead federal agency or being in a supporting role as a supporting agency. So in March of 2003, the Coast Guard moved intact from the Department of Transportation to the newly created Department of Homeland Security. This department construct, though, the Department of Homeland Security was not thought of on 9/11. It was actually recommended in 2000 in a congressional report. So when the President Bush turned to Secretary Ridge, then Governor Ridge, and said, come on down to the Office of Homeland Security in the West Wing, and said, we'd like you to work up this concept of merging these agencies, he was given a couple of months, a few key people, and he developed the construct that is now the Department of Homeland Security. When we stood up, the Coast Guard and the Secret Service were the only two agencies that moved intact into the Department of Homeland Security. The other departments, the other agencies, were all taken. They were an acquisition, they were a merger, they were a hostile takeover, they were divestitures. So you can imagine what that's like in standing up the Department of Homeland Security with that kind of construct. So there were 22 agencies that were impacted by that. This is a significant change in how we manage our domestic and security priorities, which is why I'm spending time giving you that background, because I think it's very helpful to explain who we are, where we're coming from, and then our panelists will talk about their experience and what we do on a day-to-day basis. We benefited from that transition. We went from a 20% mission alignment with the other agencies in the Department of Homeland Security to an 80% mission alignment with the other agencies in Homeland Security, interdicting threats, preventing these things from coming ashore, and this happens every day. I had a bird's eye view of that because I was a military assistant to Secretary Ridge, and then I was a military assistant to Secretary Chertoff, watching their day-to-day challenges. They were in the White House every morning briefing the president for the entire time that I was there, either one of them. And I was in the West Wing supporting their roles, and it was fast and furious. Similarly, the Coast Guard support to DoD and the COCOMs expanded. We stood up NORTHCOM. And now there's a Coast Guard flag officer that serves as Deputy J3, and additional Coast Guard officers and enlisted are integrated into their staff. Our deployable specialized forces grew in number. So what happened with the global war on terror? We changed our construct as the Coast Guard, we preserved everything that we had, and we transferred all of those capabilities just within a different US structure. Our deployable specialized forces grew, and our missions expanded, including guarding 2 oil platforms off of Iraq. And they generate 80% of Iraq's revenues. Our port security units train with and integrate into the Navy Expeditionary Combat Command's overseas force structure. As a commander of the deployable specialized forces, I worked with the commander of the Expeditionary Command, and we had integrated port security operations, and we still do. Our cutters and patrol boats support maritime operations and training and help to build our allies' coastal defense capabilities. Something Lieutenant Commander Schaffler can speak to directly, having served in southern Iraq for a year in 2010 as team leader for the first contact mission with the Iraqi Coastal Border Guard, where he organized, planned, and directed 48 training missions along the maritime border with Iran and Iraq, serving with distinction. And please share with me, as we honor him, he was awarded the Bronze Star Medal for his service in Iraq. Commander? These missions are consistent with DHS's strategy of international engagement. We push the border out. We work overseas with countries and agencies before the threat gets to the homeland. Just recently, in February this year, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Amos, and the Vice Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Ferguson, as well as the Commandant of the Coast Guard then, which was Admiral Papp, talked about their visions. And they talked about their concerns about defense at sea, and they talked about the budget constraints, which we're hearing a lot more about now. They noted the shift in the security environment since the last maritime strategy was published in 2007. They noted a dramatic increase in the proliferation of weapons and technologies capable of denying access, freedom of action, and throughout the global commons, they talked about increased political instability and conflict, creating an uptick in demands for naval forces for combatant commanders. That's the world that you're entering, it is increasing, and there's an increasing demand signal for your services and where you will participate and serve your country. Al-Qaeda has migrated from being a centralized organization to a franchise global network. There are flashpoints and potential flashpoints in the Asia and Pacific region. You're seeing more about the shift to the Pacific now. There's an entire network that we're still defending against. Admiral Ferguson observed that the challenges for the combatant commanders puts a premium around partnerships. This is something the Coast Guard does very well, is partnerships around the globe with our international partners with industry. So we're very comfortable as individuals, commands, and units moving between the military service in armed conflict and in our role in domestic law enforcement, hazard prevention, threat interdiction, search and rescue, and commercial vessel safety. These roles put us in places where we can see the threats. We know our waterways and our partners in industry, and we know the maritime public. And that's where that's the secret sauce of the Coast Guard, and that's what makes us different. I am pleased now to introduce these gentlemen that I'm honored to serve with and let them tell you their stories about where they see the Coast Guard in the global war on terror and through their actual examples. And first, I did want to introduce Chief Warrant Officer 4, Jeffrey Lusk.
Thank you, Captain.
Gunner Lusk, thank you very much for joining us. Gunner is the Navy-type, Navy-owned sponsor rep of the Office of Specialized Capabilities in the Coast Guard. Gunner Lusk has served in both the Navy and now the Coast Guard. He entered military service as an aviation electronics technician, and then moved to the Coast Guard subsequent to that. So he has served as a member of the Honor Guard, District Armories, aboard the Coast Guard cutter Mellon, a cutterman, at the Marine Safety Office in Long Island Sound, and back to service underway on the Coast Guard cutter Morgenthau, a 378-foot high-endurance cutter. He's also served on the Tactical Law Enforcement Team, North, and one of the Coast Guard's now 27 deployable specialized forces. He supported Maintenance and Logistics Commands, Pacific Area Staff, Forward Readiness Command. Gunner has seen a lot of the Coast Guard and has completed over 2,000 law enforcement boardings. He's earned his Marine Inspector and Marine Casualty qualifications and has led law enforcement teams that responded to 9/11. That gives you a sense of the kinds of things the Coast Guard does. Just by reading Gunner's bio, you get a sense of the mission sets. We had the honor of acknowledging Lieutenant Commander Schaffler's bronze medal for service. I want to introduce you to him. He's a 29-year veteran, currently on active duty following retirement from his successful civilian career. He's served in maritime safety and security, small boat stations, marine safety and security teams. Those are our Tier 3 deployable specialized forces. Legacy search and rescue missions, pollution response, port operations, and today is what's now the Coast Guard sectors. We're organized in the United States by operational sectors. He's had 5 high-profile deployments, 3 in support of large-scale domestic emergency response, and 2 overseas in support of the National Defense Mission. He was a member of Port Security Unit 305, deployed in Iraq from 2003. 2010, he went to southern Iraq as a team leader for the first contact mission with the Iraqi Coastal Border Guard, where he organized, planned, and directed 48 training missions. And that was along the maritime border with Iran and Iraq. Now, that is a contested zone, and that is where threats emerge, and that's where we want to be before they come to our domestic environment. Lieutenant Hartman is currently stationed at the Coast Guard headquarters in Cutter Forces in our Medium Endurance and Offshore Patrol Cutter Division. Prior to that, he commanded the Coast Guard cutter Pompano, an 87-footer in Gulfport, Mississippi. There is a model of an 82-footer out in the exhibit area, and the 87-footers have replaced the 82-footers as that class patrol boat. He was responsible for all assigned missions, including search and rescue, maritime homeland security, law enforcement, marine environmental protection, and one of the things we do is living marine resources. We have a very critical economic relationship with our fishermen and with living marine resources, and we enforce the laws there, as well as do search and rescue. He's also served on a 378, Coast Guard Cutter Rush, and the Cutter Aquidneck as ops officer. Very broad area, working in Bahrain, tasked with patrolling the oil fields of northern Arabian Gulf in support of Iraqi freedom, served domestically and overseas as many Coast Guard personnel do. I've asked each of them to share some of their thoughts. So first I'd like to ask Gunner Lusk. Gunner, with your broadest background with the service, how did your particular opportunities and discipline and missions shift or change after 9/11 as we talk about what is unique about the global war on terror and how it relates to the Coast Guard?
I would say the biggest shift that we've had is developing our teams to meet these new threats within the world. When I was, everybody remembers where they were for 9/11. I was actually in Puerto Rico as part of a law enforcement detachment, and we were working with U.S. Customs down there to do inspection ops on a container facility. So we'd go in there and check out the. Sorry if you can't hear me. So we go into container facilities and check out to make sure that the things in the containers were actually what they were supposed to be. Basically, this was for more counter-narcotic smuggling, or things that are being stolen from U.S., transporting through Puerto Rico and then out into the Central and South America. So that's where I was for September 11th. We ended up providing a 7-man law enforcement detail, provided security for the Coast Guard's base San Juan for 3 weeks. I flew out of San Juan and went directly to New York City for the next 3.5 months. And we shut down New York Harbor for 3.5 months, from basically sundown to sunup for all pleasure traffic. So anything that was not commercial was not moving within New York Harbor. The biggest changes that we've seen is really we've adopted a lot of new missions without giving up anything. So we have a 2,700 member specialized force now for handling terrorist threats, and that's grown from what was 600 prior to 9/11. So we've taken a big jump in personnel, but we've done it with bringing very few personnel within the Coast Guard. So we've adopted a huge mission without really fulfilling it with new people. We've taken those people out of hide that were doing something else within the fishing community, the marine safety community. So we've adapted to what the threat is today without giving up anything that we had prior to 2001.
We do. We tend to add,
Yeah.
not subtract missions. Yeah.
We've brought on a lot of technology along the way. Right now I work in the Office of Specialized Capabilities, so my office is responsible for giving the tools needed to respond to not only terrorist threats, but our law enforcement, our marine safety mission for cleaning up oil spills, nuclear biological detection, so a dive program. So we've brought on a lot of new tools and a lot of new technologies over the last 13 years now, and that technology keeps growing and growing and growing within the Coast Guard realm.
Great. Thank you, Commander.
Well, so September 11th, 2001, I was actually on a boat with a guy in handcuffs. It was kind of an interesting story. My previous career, I was a federal game warden for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and it was second day of goose and duck season, and I was out in the marsh, and I got a radio call to come in, and I said, I can't come in right now, I'm a little busy. I came in, and 4 days later found myself in New Orleans, deployed out of MSU Paducah, which is where I was stationed as a reservist. I was a petty officer, and spent the next month securing New Orleans for what we didn't know. The Coast Guard Reserve, very small force. We're about 7,200 now from an authorized strength of 12,000, which we've never quite reached.
Nope.
I've been a reservist for 29 years, and after completing 27 years in federal service and law enforcement, decided I'd throw the net and see if they'd take me back on active duty after I retired from my civilian federal job, and get the opportunity to come here and work for Coast Guard headquarters and do community affairs, which is what I do at Coast Guard headquarters. The reserves has really changed a lot since 9/11. From what was mostly a part-time segregated force, we integrated in 95, but really integrated in 2001, where we jumped in and took over the responsibilities for our port security units. They're an all-reserve force. Our 8 deployable port security units have a small active duty component, but are for the most part run by reservists and reserve officers. After a month in New Orleans, I went home for a couple months, and then during the invasion, I joined up with a port security unit 305 and headed to Rota, Spain. Actually, we didn't know where we were going. We got on a plane at Langley Air Force Base, didn't know our destination until we got in the air. And they said, you're headed into the Combat Operations Theater. We'll tell you when we're airborne where you're going. Well, we were dressed in green fatigue. We weren't dressed in sandbox, so I kind of figured it was going to be someplace green, not someplace brown. and we landed in Rota, Spain. There was some political issues that took over where we landed, and we ended up staying in Rota, Spain for 5 months since the Turkish government wouldn't let us fly over their airspace. So instead of headed into theater where we were supposed to go, we hung out in Rota, and I got to do my civilian job for 5 months. I did an Earth Day cleanup. I kind of took over my previous life at the base.
Sort of do what we need to do.
Do what we
right?
need to do, right. Did that for 5 months, came back, and then moved. I've been at 13 different Coast Guard units. One of the advantages of being a reservist is every time I move with my civilian job, I would move with my reserve job. So I've done small boat stations, port security units, MSST, our mobile, some of our tactical response units. Pretty much a lot of what Gunner has done in the reserve world. Each time I'd move with my civilian job, I got to do something different. If you looked at my resume, you'd think I couldn't keep a job, which is probably true. And I've gotten the opportunity to work from Puerto Rico to Alaska and 14 different places in between, doing a lot of really great work. From MSU Pittsburgh in 2010, an opportunity. All of my deployments have been voluntary. Nobody's selected and directed me. I've had the opportunity to go, and there was an opportunity to go to Iraq to work with the Navy, teaching the Iraqi Navy how to drive small boats. Between the time I left and the time I arrived, the Iraqi Navy decided they didn't want us anymore. And so I arrived in Bahrain with no place to go and no job. The captain that was there, Captain Scott Bobby, who's now in Lant Area, decided that he would attempt to contact the Iraqi Coastal Border Guard. Now, we'd spent millions, billions of dollars on the Army, the Navy, the Air Force in Iraq, but no one had ever contacted the Coastal Border Guard because they were embedded in the Border Patrol and really a small force not really known to many folks. So we made an initial contact and put a small team of 16 people together and made first contact with the Iraqi Coastal Border Guard. We made 48 missions outside the wire, protected by the Army. We didn't have our own organic force, so we had to travel in MRAPs with those folks, sometimes 6-8 hours each way to get to some of these small remote border stations where we found these men had no ammo, no fuel, poor boats, no uniforms, no discipline, and got an opportunity to do some really great things, teaching them boat maintenance, teaching them combat operations skills, cleaning their fuel systems, filters. I even spent $1,500 of my own money and made a patch for them from a logo I found in one of their books, and I'm hoping to go back there in 10 years or so and see that patch on somebody's uniform. So,
Great.
big change working in the Coast Guard Reserves.
And I think that the common theme, you know, I hear you really emphasizing is we go into environments and we make things happen. And I think you're probably understating the power of the kind of influence that has in creating capacity and capability. Because what we don't want is we don't want to make enemies. And we want to take those folks who are looking for U.S. support and engage with them very actively. And we do that as well in the commercial vessel safety stuff. We have LNG now that comes in by tankers. And the LNG vessel that comes into Boston comes in, loads in Yemen. So when they first, and it's a private industry, they can load wherever they want. And so when they said, hey, we're loading this 700-foot tanker fully loaded with LNG, and we're going to drive up the middle of Boston Harbor, and we're going to be about 50 yards offshore the whole way, and then we're going to tie up in your port, and we're going to unload. And by the way, we're loading in Yemen. What kind of bells and whistles, alarms, and signals go off in your head? So they went off in our head, and then we engaged Department of Defense, we engaged Department of State, we engaged industry, we engaged all sorts of players to really vet that. And we had to put in and add additional layers of security. We talk about the layered security. So that means when you get to Gibraltar, you're doing a dive op to inspect the underwater hull. That means you're inspecting the vessel, and you're taking bomb dogs on the tugboats that go out to transfer the pilot. All of these operational things you need to think about in this threat environment. And that's the kind of thing the Coast Guard does.
And a lot of those relationships were also interior, not just relating to other foreign governments. You had to educate the Army, you had to educate the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines. They had no experience with the Coast Guard in those overseas operations. So you had to go in and lay the groundwork with your own people before you could lay your groundwork with your foreign forces. challenge.
Absolutely. Thanks very much. Lieutenant, your thoughts on that topic?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Hi, on. Can you guys hear me? I won't keep you as long. I haven't had as cool of a career as these guys have. I was in your shoes, a lot of you guys' shoes and gals' shoes, just a few years ago. I left the academy and went to a deck watch officer billet for